Okay, now I'm allowed to introduce you. Uh, It's my pleasure to continue this day with welcoming Professor Elina Eriksson here. Elina, you are a professor in HCI, and you're going to tell us something about tools and techniques for low carbon futures. And I think that's going to fit really well into this concept of the day in terms of giving you approaches to more solutions and not just outlining problems. So we are really looking forward to your presentation. Thanks a lot for being with us, and the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. So I will again do the presentation sharing here. So you're supposed to see my slides now. And I just have to correct you. I'm not yet a professor. I'm just an associate professor so far. But thanks for that presentation. So I am situated at the Royal Institute of Technology in Stockholm. And I'm at the school called Electrical Engineering and Computer Science, and my background is computer science. So I have an engineering title in computer science, but during my studies, I changed my topic into human-computer interaction. And I worked as a programmer for a while, and then I became a PhD student, but my PhD studies were not on sustainability issues. So this is something I have been working on since 2013. And I'm going to situate myself a bit more before I start talking. So I am part of this research group called Mid4S, which is a lousy name because it doesn't tell you anything, media technology and interaction design for sustainability. And I'm actually the team leader of this research group together with Daniel Pargman, who actually Kelly Widdix mentioned in her previous presentation. And we have this slide where we present our group. So we're interested in working with ICT's role in the transition to a more sustainable society. We're aiming at the good life within planetary boundaries. And most of our studies so far has been around food, energy, transportation, and cities. But this is not excluded to this. And I should also say that for us also social sustainability is quite important. But the majority of the projects are geared toward environmental sustainability. And today I'm actually going to talk about futuring. So another research interest of us is future scenarios, counterfactuals, design fictions, etc. And then the third research interest that we have is education, actually. So we've been teaching sustainability in our bachelor and master level education since 2012, and also written research papers on how to integrate sustainability into computing education. And I saw Mael waving his hand to me. Yay! He used to be my student. So thank you, Mael, for welcoming me to this situation. So today I'm going to talk about futuring and energy. That's why they are red on the slide here. So before I continue, I have to say that the work I'm presenting today is not something I've been working on alone. So this is a long list of names that you don't have to read in detail. I just want to send my love to all my collaborators that I've had over the years, including the cat on the picture. Like no presentation is fulfilled without a cat. So this is my colleague Daniel's cat, Loka, who I've been spending time with before the corona pandemic when we were doing research. Yes, so a heartfelt thank to my collaborators. So I'm going to step off or start this presentation with talking a little bit about design fiction. And this is only very shortly. If you want to read up on this, you could probably do it. So within HEI, design fiction has been used quite a lot within research. It comes from this idea that you can have these technological props that tell you something about the future. And one of the most maybe famous ones are the topmost example here in the pictures, which is Tom Cruise in Minority Report. And he's using these hand gestures long before they were actually existing in technological development or in commercial products. So it's this. So the quote here on top is diegetic prototypes that demonstrate to large public audiences a technology's need, benevolence, and viability. And what I like about the Minority Report when you look at that movie is not only that he's showing this kind of future technology, but he's also showing the breakdown of it. So if you look at the movie, you're going to see that someone enters the room and is supposed to say hello, and he waves out with his hand, and the whole interface that he's looking at is just collapsing because that was some kind of hand gesture that closed everything down. In the bottom, you have of the pictures, you have a design fiction that some colleagues of mine designed together with IKEA, which I guess everybody knows, the large furniture company. And it's a brochure that looks exactly like the IKEA catalog, but showing different examples of IoT or cloud-based furniture that you could use. So in this example, you probably can't read it. It says sömnrik bed. Let your sleeping preferences, mattress density, pillow fluff factor, self-comforting comforter temperature profiles follow you whenever you go to any of your network of hotelier affiliates. Preferences and biometrics are all safely stored in the IKEA Tillsammans cloud. So this is a service that you can buy then, which is of course all fake. But reading this and looking at it, it starts to make you think about the future. So the last quote on this slide is then, like science fiction, design fiction creates imaginative conversations about possible future worlds. It speculates about a near future tomorrow, extrapolating from today. And maybe the main reason why we use design fiction is defamiliarization. To make what we take for granted something that we actually see again and maybe question, but also to be able to imagine other futures. I think the quote by Bleecker, design fiction is something that extrapolates from the now and looks at potential futures going into the future, but it doesn't really say how far off in the future this is, or how wide this cone of possibilities are. And you might wonder, why is she talking about all of this? Well, I think that with all the problems that we're facing, which I think you have already heard of, we also have to kind of imagine possibilities that aren't already here. Both the dark ones and the positive ones, so that we can steer our society towards something where we can live. And I think that this is related to what Julia Steinberger was talking about earlier today, that they do these models about how we can live a good life within planetary boundaries and energy consumption. When you look at design fiction, often they're quite near in the future, so they don't go very far off. And also that there's no systematic or stepwise discussion of how we ended up in the proposed future state. So often you just get thrown into or are shown these artifacts of the future, and you don't really know how we ended up there. And I think that it's also important to discuss, how do we get there if we want to have actionable futures? So one first example from my own research that I've done is a book that we wrote called Vitiden. It's a energy fiction, and it was based on these future scenarios that our Swedish energy agency developed, showing 4 different possible futures of the Swedish energy system. And these were based on modeling, and they were based on large trends in society, but they were not based on whether or not, not aiming for a sustainable future. But one of these scenarios were actually within the planetary boundaries or within the Paris Agreement. So we wanted to explore that scenario. And the scenario that the Energy Agency developed was very, based on pretty good numbers and facts and stuff, but it was totally void of lived life or any idea of what it would be like to be a human in this future. Even so, they had some pictures in this scenario pamphlet they had developed, but there was always some person who had turned around and showed their back or something. So there were very hard to understand. So what would it be for me to live in this future in 2050 when we've fulfilled the Paris Agreement? So we actually transformed this Swedish Energy Agency scenario into this book, this pamphlet that you're looking at on the slides. So it was kind of a reconceptualization, and it took a long step into the future. So this was discussing 2050. And this energy fiction is partly a voice of like a strong political voice, a person standing on a soapbox and argumenting for why this future needs to happen, and based on or inspired by a manifesto written in the 1930s called Acceptera in Sweden, which discussed the modern society. And then there's also like a future archaeology where we show remnants of, like, we go into the future and bring with us things that seems normal and easy to understand. For example, a pizza menu, because you will probably eat pizza in the future, but there's like very few pizzas with meat on them. There's pizzas with insects on them, and the prices for the meat pizzas are very, very expensive. And actually, I think that this particular artifact that we developed is of course interesting, but what was most interesting for us was the process of trying to figure out what would be the material future for people to live in. So I'm going to go on and kind of backwards talk about what we did to explore this. So one of the ways we tried to gather data to do this publication was to have a workshops with people. And it's pretty hard to imagine futures. So you need to have some tools to make people to explore futures. So that's what we did in this workshop. And we found during this process that you need to balance provocative and affirmative design. So if you show people too much negative sides or too provocative things, they will shut down and not talk so much about it. And in this particular workshop, we tried to find a balance between provocative and affirmative things that made you feel comfortable or made you feel positive about things. So in this workshop, before they came here, they had to fill in a climate calculator, which was readily available on the internet. All of them had been self-reported environmental interested people. And when they saw their own footprint, they realized that they weren't actually. So they had pretty large footprints above Swedish average, and they were pretty angry. And then we presented them this energy agency scenario where they had to go down to a level of 0.5 ton of carbon emissions. And for them who had maybe 15 or 12 tons of carbon emissions per year, it was pretty harsh. So what we did, for example, was to give them this deck of cards with lots of different pictures, and they were sitting there and sorting them onto this board that you see in the lower left corner, where they had to think about, is this something that I see more of or less of in the future? And how does that make me feel? Does it make me feel sad or happy or anything? And then we also used these headlines from a newspaper to provoke them to think about what the future would be. So that's in the lower right corner. And what it says in Swedish is, tonight, it's the last takeoff of an airplane. It doesn't say where or what kind of airplane is, but it was super provoking for them to think that potentially we might not fly so much in the future. And the other poster you see there is that Riga is Sweden's new vacation paradise because we potentially can go there by boat, but also on the bottom half, 100 hens have escaped after the latest storm that we had. And they also made their own kind of headlines about what they think about the future. So one of them is, for the sake of my children and my grandchildren's survival, I will abstain from meat and flying. Yes, so I have to continue now. We did a little bit of other things there, but what I think is important to take from this is that you need to help people and give them something to explore with, because just asking them what the future will be like is a too hard task. So another criticism against design fiction is then that you go forward, but the cone of possibilities might be a bit too small. So what happens if you move the point of divergence backwards in time? And that's something also we have been exploring in our research. One publication that we had recently together with Roy Bender, it's me and Daniel Pargman, is about counterfactuals, if that is a futuring technique. So what we're looking into this paper is that, is there a symmetry between these common futuring techniques called backcasting and forecasting, if we move them backwards in time, so that you do something with past tense, which sounds really weird, doesn't it? But basically they are what if scenarios about the past. So this is a theoretical contribution because we hadn't really done any workshopping or anything else around this. We have another paper published that's about, like, it's a what if scenario discussing what if there had only been half the oil on Earth. And we, in that paper that's published in social research and energy research and social science, we kind of discuss the way we developed the scenario. But the important thing here is that you could explore things in the past and that might have benefits for us, even though it's actually something that you would like to work towards in the future. I don't know if you're aware of the backcasting and forecasting methods, so I'm just going to shortly say that forecasting is when you basically take trends and you extrapolate into the future and you look at what will happen in the future. There are many different ways of doing this, but they are often based on different, like, mega trends, or forecasting on how much traffic we will have, or even weather and climate. And backcasting is a normative process where you find a point in the future and you try to figure out, how do we get there? So what are the different pathways to a future that we want? And it's often participatory. And we then think that there's a possibility to use similar methods, but in the past. So you might wonder, why the heck does she want to do this? Well, we think that there might be some benefits with working through problems in the past. So we think that when you're doing forecasting, that's good for guiding innovation. But if you do recasting, it's good for evoking your imagination. And it might also be making you see different possible outcomes, or that we're not kind of locked in, we're actually having lots more possibilities than we can see. And when it comes to pastcasting, we think that backcasting is good for democratizing planning, since it can be done in a participatory way. So that's when you're looking for a particular future that you're steering towards. But if you do that in the past, we think that it could also reveal biases. So showing what's hindering us for reaching the targets and the goals that we have. Also, I think what's important is that if you do this in the past, you're actually escaping technological optimism. So we won't invent a new fusion reactor, or we won't go into space if we're trying to solve the climate crisis and other environmental problems in the past, because we know that we didn't. There's also a level of defamiliarization here, but it's also playing it a bit safe. So there's a safety space, like a sandbox, that you can use to explore these issues. And we actually, how weirdly this sounds, got a project funded with this as the core focus. So the project is called Beyond the Event Horizon, Tools to Explore Local Energy Transformation. It's in collaboration with the Swedish Transition Network. The goal of this project is to develop a scenario workshop methodology and to use it to carry out workshops that explore and support local energy transitions by helping local actors focus on, process, democratically anchor and expand what is perceived to be possible. and it's funded by the Swedish Energy Agency. So the idea is that this workshop methodology will be used by the Swedish Transition Network to invite people in a local context and try to start up a process of trying to do the transition. So they have been part of the development, but they're also the stakeholders that are going to get the method later on. But it's going to be a Creative Commons license so that anyone can use it. And of course, we're working under the Paris Agreement goals here, and we're working with the carbon law, stating that we should decrease our carbon emissions by 50% every decade. And it's about energy, but on a broad sense. So we're looking at any kind of practices or infrastructure locally that has to do with energy. So also food, transport, and direct energy use. And our goal is to expand what these people see as possible, not necessarily to come up with new innovations, rather kind of sparking these, giving seeds to seeing new possibilities, and also support network building, since this is something that concerned citizens can invite local enterprises, the municipality, the regional civil servants, etc., to start working on what can we do locally to work with this. We were supposed to be doing workshops live, of course, during the last year, and due to the pandemic, we had to redirect and work with online workshops instead. It has been a co-design process, and we've done 2 prototype workshops, one with experienced facilitators and then also with our academic reference group. And what you see on this picture is a Miro board where we're exploring this alternate timeline that you go from one point in the past into an alternate present, where we actually have cut our emission by 50%. And then we continued during the spring to actually do 2 workshops in a local context. So the starting point here on the left-hand side of the slide that you're seeing, and you're not supposed to be able to read the post-its here, is that in 2008 there was an oil crisis. So the financial crisis that hit us in 2008 was actually an oil crisis, and we ended up in a 2021 where we used only half the oil. And what we're exploring, besides presenting this new scenario and looking at how is life in 2021 when we're using half the oil, based on things that they have sent in beforehand around gratitude and gratefulness, we try to figure out what has happened between 2008 and 2021 to make us use half as much oil. So again, we use the hypothesis of no technological optimism. They have to find solutions. That's kind of already there. It's kind of facing up to this hard fact that we have to do less, but within a safe space. We think it might be safe partly because you don't have to bring your own working title and role into this. So it's not you who have to solve this problem in the future, which is unknown, but it's actually you in the past. So it's a lot of kind of variables that you can play with that makes you a bit more safe. And then we bring them out of this workshop by telling them that, but wait, this is actually what we have to do until 2030. And the 2 workshops that we've been doing, we're still doing the analysis of the material that come out of it, but our experience is, like anecdotally then, that they were very energized by this, and that they actually got a more widened view of possibilities of what they could do. And many also wanted to use this methodology. So they asked us if they could learn how to do this kind of workshop and put it into use in other settings, because they found it very pedagogical to present this 50% cut down in the past and work that through. Yes, and I actually been talking so fast that I'm a bit ahead of time, so I'm going to skip to a couple of slides that I haven't shown you or sent to you. So I think that my time is up at 10 past. Nobody's protesting, so I'll continue talking.
Yes, yesterday 5 minutes before the Q&A.
Yep. So just then a short last example of things that you can do to play with the future, which we've been using in the workshop also, is fictional abstracts. And I think this is something that you can't use with the general public, but for researchers, this is brilliant. So everybody knows, at least when you come up a year in or so into your PhD studies, what an abstract, a research abstract is. You read lots of them. And if they are well written, you can really, it draws up this alternate world quite quickly if it's a short abstract. It has been used for collecting future visions, and we used it in order to explore what the future of computing and wisdom could be, which was a special issue in the paper Futures. So we wanted to collect data about this. So we were having a structured conversation on the future of wisdom. And if you later want, you can go to this WordPress site where we have the call for this workshop, but there's also like these instructions on how to write a good fictional abstract. So in this workshop that we had at this conference, we collected, had a call for participation where people sent in abstracts, and then we helped them to rewrite them. Not all of them needed revision, but some of them. And then we spent half a day on exploring these abstracts and half a day discussing the future of wisdom and computing, which then after we analyzed the material and wrote up it became this paper. But just to give you an example of fictional abstracts, and I think this would be brilliant to use when you start up a research project or something to think about what would be the results from this project in the future, or if you just want to explore a topic that might have some friction or problems with it. And I'm going to read you a fictional abstract now so that you can see how it is a bit provoking. So this was from Britta F. Schulte, and she sent in this abstract called Deo Ex Machina, a new framework for virtual agents in automated elderly care provision. Recent years have seen an increase of interaction between virtual agents and humans, VHI. While the adoption has been successful in many areas, such as production and education, other areas, and specifically elderly care, show a lack of engagement. Age seems to be a defining factor, as users are not used to the technology and do not benefit from its full potential. Recent updates of the VA technology, specifically for the sector, aesthetic adaptations or new interfaces did not seem to have made a significant change in the area. In this paper, we present an analysis of interaction logs gathered in a care home equipped with virtual agents throughout. Contrary to common beliefs, the interaction does not break down on the VA side, but on the human side, as people reject, misinterpret, or ignore the well-intentioned suggestions of the VA. Following these insights, we present a new framework to support interactions, DEO. We propose the 3 steps: dispense and log how the human responds, educate the human of the insights he's lacking to make the necessary changes, and overwrite his decisions should he repeatedly decide not to follow them. We give detailed instructions on how to best implement each step based on our results. We argue that these steps will lead to increased adherence to the suggestions by the VAs, even by the elderly population, thereby making the technology accessible to a wider audience. And maybe I will leave you there with this, to my opinion at least, bleak future of how we will work with virtual agents in elderly care provision. And I hope that maybe some of my very quick talk has given you sparks of ideas of how we can approach and visualize or explore the future in different ways. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Elina. I think in particular, this idea of these abstracts that you've been presenting at the very end is something we could really well incorporate into our hackathon element on Thursday. It's unfortunate that we're learning about this only now, but I think it's a really cool idea. Are there like other, like, I don't know, not examples, but short ideas that came up during this workshop, something you could point out right now?
So I think that...
What was the scope of this abstract development workshop?
This particular one was the future of computing and wisdom. So the future special issue, the Futures magazine is a future studies magazine that has been published for 50 years. And they wanted to do a special issue, what will be like the next 50 years. And they had a specific focus on wisdom. So they invited people from different disciplines to work through and discuss what is wisdom. And I was contacted by one of the editors that would I like to do it within the HI field. So that's what led us to do this. But we've been working with future abstract. We have like a paper that hasn't been published, unfortunately. We've been working it through in different ways, especially when you have this broader futures interest. So I think that around many of the problems or issues we're facing around climate change, etc., and the ideas of how to solve them, you could definitely write these fictional abstracts to kind of quickly go through or imagine what possible outcomes there could be and present them in a way that is easily to read for a scientific public and read them and discuss them, since they're not very long. So in the slides, I will then make a new PDF and send you these slides with also the fictional abstracts included. I've put this link to a WordPress blog where we have step instructions on how to write an interesting abstract. So there kind of need to be something that is, there cannot be only positive results within a fictional abstract. You need kind of some kind of friction or something that makes it a bit more evocative, I guess.
Yeah, very interesting idea. I like that a lot. Questions from the audience, please.
Hi, Elina. No, I will just comment on that as well and then ask my question. I just want to say that there is an ICT4S paper from 2000, I don't know, 17 or 18, where Elina and Daniel and all the ICT4S community participated in writing fictional abstracts, and then it was analyzed as a research kind of, doing research on what the researchers in this field could be imagining on the future, and that's interesting. And if you want, I can share the link. But now I come to my question, Elina. I was wondering if you know about it's a French initiative, but it's called Fresque du Climat in French, or Climate Collage, Climate Collage, or Climate Fresque. I don't know if you've heard of it, because
yes, it's a card thingy.
Yeah, it made me think about the workshop you were talking about, and like how to reach kind of like, let's say, a future with only 2 tons per person or something. So I don't know because I would be interested by your opinion on it, if you really have kind of like seen how it works in practice, but otherwise.
Yes, I've heard about it, and I actually think we did play it at some point. Just before the corona, a PhD student at the ABE school here at KTH, Nicolas Francard.
Oh yeah.
I think he brought it, and we kind of played it, and I think that's brilliant. I think we're really bad as humans to imagine futures. I don't know if you've tried to do this like 10-year plan or thinking about where will I be in 10 years, and it's super hard, and it's very easy to continue to think that it will be like now, but maybe a little bit more. And sometimes you have to break those thought structures. And honestly, many people refer to become like super negative also. Like it's going to be as now, but more, or it's going to be Mad Max or some other apocalyptic vision. And I think that we need to be able to explore the possibilities of living a life within planetary boundaries that in some ways might be harder, but also really, really nice and good, and to steer towards that. So I guess that this kind of research complements the models that Julia Steinberger was presenting, where they try to see what would life be if we have an energy consumption that is sufficient.
Yeah, thank you.
Just to elaborate on that very quickly, last year we did the Fresque du Numérique, which is close to the Fresque du Climat. We could maybe, as an introductive activity, more also like icebreaker and having everyone seeing, I would say, an overview. So maybe we will share it later if you want. Nicolas did a very nice graphical version of it, so that was a nice icebreaker. Just to say, yeah, we will display it during the break. Any other question after this one? Okay.
Yes, I have a question about in your hypothetical scenarios where that emerge through the different workshops. Did the participants take into account geopolitical issues? Like, for instance, I don't know if I use one kind of energy, like nuclear, I may be relying on Congo. I may be dependent on Congo for uranium, or China for solar panels, or I don't know, Saudi Arabia for oil, or Russia for natural gas, or things like that. So in the domain of energy, there is also strong geopolitical dimension. And was that taken into account in your workshops?
Thank you for that question. A really good question. In the workshop where we exploring energy futures workshop, we had this card that you placed out on this map of more or less of, or happy and sad about it. We tried to have a wide assortment of cards, but they were partly open for interpretation. And one of the cards were people marching with military uniforms on them. And people in the workshop, when they were trying to figure out what the future would be like, that was a fear that people had, that we would have more strife and wars over resources, etc. So that I think you need to leave open for that, because it is of course a natural, not natural, it's an unnatural, but it's a possibility that we have to consider and also try to steer away from. So that, but you also need to be able to pick it up and discuss it and handle the emotions that might arise from thinking about climate immigrants, or where we source materials from and what we support when we get those materials from these places like Congo, etc. And in the second workshop, the event horizon, where we're working together with the transition network, it hasn't come up so much yet, but it might be. But I also think what is different there is that I don't know how much you know about the transition network that emerged from the UK, but that's a group of people who are practivists. They try to do the transition. They try to live the new life, the new low carbon life. So many of them are people who have moved out into the countryside, and they try to grow their own food and be part of other initiatives locally to localize the economy and not be as globally dependent. But of course, I recognize that there are huge issues with putting up PVs and where the source material come from, etc., etc. So both yes and no. And I guess that if you do it in the past, like if you use a counterfactual scenario, what if scenario, it's a bit more safe to approach those issues, because it's painful. I mean, it's super painful to be a colonizer and live off other people in a negative way, as it is terrible that we're not handling or taking care of nature in a good way either. So it's not only humans, it's also animals and plants and everything that we are hurting with our activities.
We have time for maybe one more question. And that question is coming from, no. Okay, let's try and fit them both. Try to be quick.
Okay, I'll try. I'd like to thank you for your talk. And you talked about some direct effects of your workshops on participants, but I wondered if you looked at maybe behavior changes that might have been due to the workshop, and if you can talk a bit about that.
Yes, we haven't looked at behavior changes. So in the first case, we were very focused on doing this end results, the energy fiction, the book. And the workshop was more a way of a means to that end. But afterwards, we were like, oh my God, it was the workshop that was the interesting part of this research. So we should have done more around it. Because obviously, having to address your own climate footprint and then work through that in relation to what is a sustainable level is super, super interesting. And I think that's important, not only to give them the digital tools to understand, for example, climate footprint, but also find ways of together work that through, which I think is key, and that's other parts of my research. When it comes to the Event Horizon project, we had the 2 workshops during the spring, and I know that in one group they had a follow-up meeting, and they wanted to like make a pledge for working with this within the organizations and respective organizations, because they came from different parts of the like municipality, region, and company, etc., and so on. But I don't know how what has happened later, and we will follow up in a half year or something like that to see what happened further on along the line. But I don't have any of those results yet.
Thank you.
Okay, we have the last one, but if the answer and the question could fit in like 2 minutes, that would be fantastic. Thanks.
So I understood that it targets, thank you for the presentation, the project targets mostly already engaged people, but so is the aim of the project more like a psychotherapy or to educate researcher, or there is an ambition to scale up this kind of activity?
So when it comes to the workshop methodology, I present not the fictional abstracts, but the workshop methodology I presented in the end. The idea is not psychotherapy or something. It's a way of finding new collaborations and finding new possibilities and starting up some kind of something to happen. And we can't promise that will happen, but we were trying to set it up so that people can connect and find new ideas. And it's not going to only be the groups that we're doing the workshops within our research project. We have a plan to also hand it over to the transition network so that they can spread it within their network, both in Sweden and potentially in other countries. But we also wanted to do it Creative Commons licensed and publish it, so that also not people within the transition network, but in general, if you want to explore what would it mean to fulfill the first step in the carbon law, a 50% reduction of carbon emissions. People could do that through this material.
Would a sorry, how did you call it? Fictional abstract workshop for something like this doctoral school for a group of young scientists with a strong interest in sustainable ICT be a thing that you would want to follow up on?
Sure, definitely. And
I think it could be a cool thing.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that it's like the workshop that we had around computing and wisdom. It's one of the best workshops I've ever been on, because it became so concrete and interesting to see all these wild ideas of diverse things about the future, and it's very short format, so that you quickly can read through a couple of them, and you can be provoked, and you can be angry, and you can laugh at it, etc., etc. So I think that's a brilliant idea, and I will rearrange my slides and send you a new PDF, and you can see the link to the Nordic workshop call for papers, where you see kind of instructions on how to write a fictional abstract.
Cool. Thanks a lot, Elina.
And if you use it, please contact me and tell me how it went.
I don't know if it fits into this one, but let's see what we're going to do with it. Thanks a lot, Elina. Yeah. Big applause to Stockholm, and thank you very much. It was a pleasure.
Thank you for inviting me. Bye-bye.